All right, hey guys, welcome back. We're going to be covering the Middle Ages, specifically the early Middle Ages. The last time we covered how Europe became Christian, and with the rise of Christianity and throughout the Roman Empire, how that really affected society at that time. The Middle Ages is a really important period of time, as I'm going to display here, that it really takes obviously in between two major events, right? So we have the Greco-Roman era, the classical era with these empires, and then also the Renaissance. And another way we can call the Middle Ages is the Dark Ages or the medieval times. And it's going to go on for about 10 centuries, 1,000 years, from 500 to 1500 AD. And what's interesting about the Middle Ages is that it's called the Dark Ages because they saw that civilization, Western civilization, really existed and thrived and flourished during the Greco-Roman period and in the Renaissance period. But this middle section of time of history has really saw it as a dark time and place, okay? Because civilization really fell apart, and it just was not the same as it was before. I'll go into detail as far as what was lost in civilization during the Dark Ages, but just to know that during the Middle Ages, no one actually says, "Hey, we're in the Middle Ages," right? It was really a concept that came after, during the Renaissance, after the Middle Ages, and looking back, okay? And they looked back and they saw it was not in a very good light. Obviously, things that are dark are not good. So just understand that people thought that it was such a better time during the time when the Roman Empire was going, and also the Renaissance. All right, and so the reasons why they thought that is because of this term, civilization. So what? How is a civilization defined? What can we say that this people group? Hey, they're an actual civilization other than just a village, right? So there's 7 things. Okay, the first one is that a civilization should be able to generate a surplus. So that means that the technology towards agriculture, in terms of how they farm, farmers can produce more than they need, and not just barely sustaining themselves. Okay, surplus. Number two. They have occupations that are very specialized. In a village or town, pretty much everyone just takes part in manual labor, and you do part A and I do part B and he does part C. But in an actual civilization, we're going to see there's actually complex jobs. So in your government, right, there's going to be different positions, right? As a trader, there's different types of trades. In merchandise, there's a vast amount of kinds and types that you can sell and buy, right? And you could even be in a religious position too. If you're not in a civilization and developed civilization, you're not going to see these types of jobs available. Third thing, there's going to be clear social class distinctions. Your status is defined by your social class, is defined based upon the wealth that you have, the prestige of your job, right? There's a clear distinction between the upper class, middle class, lower class, the slaves, okay? Fourth thing, the growth of cities. So towns, like a town is like a walnut, right? But it's not like a city like Los Angeles, okay? So towns actually have to grow into cities. A city actually needs to have an economic, political, cultural, social life develop coming out of it, right? There must be some type of growth that's happening that's more than just population size, right? There has to be a substance that characterizes that city. Okay. Fifth thing, complex formal governments. The government needs to be actually involved in their society and the people in promoting their country or their nation or even that town or county. Okay, especially economically, right? So how are they going to pull together resources? How are they going to assign jobs? Okay, how are they going to create like an established market system, marketplace? The government needs to get involved, making laws for people too. Okay. Long distance trade, really important. Most of the time, what we're going to see in this lecture is that trade could be just very localized, and that's not what a civilization has. A civilization has the capability to actually go to the Orient, to very, very far nations and people groups, and they can use the long distance trade to really stimulate their economy and also bring back artifacts that are very cultural, and they can learn and even just intellectually bring other people, leaders and stuff into their system, okay, into their civilization. All right, last thing, number 7 is that a civilization is going to have an organized writing system. So the different leaders and traders, they need to communicate somehow, right? And so to learn from each other and saying like, oh, I've learned your language, okay, and just to communicate with them allows them just to build better relationships too. Okay, so keep that in mind. What we're going to see is that in the Dark Ages, in the Middle Ages, civilization is going to come to a decline. Okay, all right. So we know the Greco-Roman period. The Middle Ages is actually going to be built into 3 main sections. You have the early Middle Ages, high Middle Ages, and the late Middle Ages with their corresponding years right here, and then we come to the Renaissance. So if you see this thing at the bottom, okay, if you see this timeline on the paper, sorry, it's not that clear. Okay, essentially this is going to be a timeline for you to make your own markers. It's not something you need to do so accurately, but it's just as a tool available for you, just to know that if you wanted to kind of plot out what happens within each year or major event, you can, because it's on your sheet. Okay, a few things. So why did the Dark Ages come? Why did the Middle Ages actually happen? Well, Rome as an empire began to disintegrate. It was in its decline around the 400s, and so Constantine, as we know in 330, he actually finds a new capital in Constantinople, right, part of the Byzantine Empire. So see, there's 2 capitals now, Rome and the Byzantine Empire. Following that, Rome is actually surrounded by a lot of barbarians, as you can see, with the Huns, Ostrogoths, okay, Visigoths, Burgundians, all this stuff, Visigoths, okay. There's plenty of barbarians always lurking around. These basically are people that do not speak Greek or Latin. You have the Celts, right, by Britain and stuff. Long story short, the Romans always try to keep the barbarians out of their empire, by drawing a line, saying, we're not going to cross this area, right? North of this line, it's not good. But over time, barbarians are going to filter in because for some reasons they would, join the army, right? They'd be recruited in there because generals would be, and captains would be recruiting them. And then over time they'd be rewarded, little farms, and then they would get married to people like Romans of that time, and they will settle down. Okay, and so that's kind of how the barbarians slowly got assimilated and started to seep into the Roman Empire. Okay, and so what happens is that the Roman Empire begins to be diluted, and so the culture that the Roman Empire was known to be, that they could easily assimilate different ethnicities because they had a whole administrative system, and the greatness of Rome was just over time too hard to manage. And at the right time, okay, you have the barbarians coming in time after time, and they're going to sack Rome. Okay, so in 450 AD, you have Attila the Hun, and you guys know about the Huns coming from Central Asia. Okay, and so Rome, that was in its decline, finally fell in 476. And so this is where we're going to see that there's no longer a Western Roman Empire, but only just the Eastern Roman Empire. Okay, so you have Attila the Hun in the picture on the very right, and then you have the last Roman governor, emperor, is kneeling to the barbarian king. And so what we're going to see now is that the Roman Empire is not completely gone, because you still have the East, but it's just now renamed to the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so just the East is standing, the West has now fallen. All right, this is really important. We understand that now that the barbarians are kind of in the mix, right? They are part of and taking over Rome and all these other cities that were once part of the Roman Empire. How has this changed, right? Why is it called the Dark Ages? And so we talked about how this whole civilization was available and it was thriving in the Roman Empire, but it's going to actually change over time, and it's going to contrast greatly. Okay. All right. First thing is that you have a T-chart. Okay, so I have a comparison chart between what happens in the Roman Empire and how it will change with the barbarians. So now the barbarians are in charge. Okay, in the Roman Empire, you had the concept and saying, oh, I'm part of this empire, I'm part of this state, right? There are a lot of different institutions, right? There's the cultural section of town, right? There's the marketplace, right? The trade, and there's different types of institutions that are part of the government, part of the overall empire, the laws that they made. But for the barbarians, it really just says, oh, there is no concept of an empire. There's no concept of a state. There's no concept of government. It's just my extended family. This is our, generations of people, and we're a bunch of different tribes that don't like each other, and we fight each other. Okay, so it's a different way of life, basically. In the Roman Empire, you have governors that are the ones that they're ruling. They're in charge. They're the one that takes leadership. In Germanic barbarians, you're going to see that it's just these chieftains, right? They are the ones, the oldest ones, the ones that their tribe looks to. Okay, in the empire, you see that there is laws, and you rule by the law. Whatever the written law says, you must follow, right? It's a civilization. It's written down, but there is no written language, right? Part of barbarian culture, and so it really comes down to who do I serve? Who am I loyal to, right? It's my family. It's those that are my kin, right? Those that I've grown up with, those that I've fought with alongside. These are the people that I protect. I don't care about anything else. I do what I want. Okay. In the empire, it's very centralized. All the power and authority is into the emperor and all of his governors under him. But and they would rule the entire empire, right? Depending what district you're in and that kind of thing. They had a central government. The power is in a single place. Localized government by the Germanic barbarians is that there was no single ruler. Everything was then just distributed into the local tribes, and then they call him the chieftain or the king right there. Okay, and so their rule was not very vast. Cities were very popular. We talked about the Roman Empire was an empire of cities, right? So obviously cities can go up to 200,000 people, 500,000 people. Those are really, really big cities. In the cities, we talked about how there's specialized jobs according to your skills and your craft, and if you're an artisan, all these types of things. Barbarians, no. Okay, estates. You live on this estate, right? You have farming that's available. You do manual labor, but there really isn't any specialized jobs, right? Nothing. You're not really changing what you really do. It's just that you just self-sustaining. Okay. All right, we talked about long distance trade as one of the things, even a currency, right? You had a currency system where you could actually buy and sell in the marketplace. You have different coins and things that can be purchased, but the barbarians, they didn't have a system of currency, right? They just bartered. They says, you know what, I'll trade a chicken for a pig's leg, right? And I'll trade it for this potato, right? And so that's really how they did it. So it's a lot more rudimentary, a lot more uncivilized, and they just focused upon what was local. Okay. Literacy, culture, talked about how there is no written language. Culture is thriving in the empire, but there isn't much culture at all, right? Their culture to them is, oh, I want to fight for my family. I want to bring pride and courage and honor to my tribe, and I'm gonna fight to the death. And so that's kind of like just the values of these barbarians. Whereas through the Roman Empire, they're beginning to have a religion that's established, whereas the barbarians are more heathen and pagan. There is a system of justice. There is a system of having courts and judges that is followed by law, ruled by law. Remember we talked about how if you're a Roman citizen, you have certain privileges. With barbarians, there is no citizenship. It's just you are part of this clan or this clan, part of this tribe or this tribe. And so if there was a dispute between two people, they would do a trial by ordeal. They would throw you into the water, and if you were to float, you're guilty. But if you were to sink, you would have drowned, but you're innocent. Makes a lot of sense, right? Or trial by battle, right? Whoever fights and whoever wins, right? They're the victor. They were the innocent ones. That's how they believed that the gods would, make it right. Okay, bring justice. We talked about how Rome, all roads lead to Rome, and Rome had the Roman Empire had many developed roads, right? And the thing is that the barbarians never really did anything with them. They never used them. They never built cities around the roads. They even just took the stones out of the roads and used them as building blocks because they had really no idea of what's the purpose of having a road at all. Okay, so these are the major changes, and you can see it's really night and day, and that's really why they call it the Dark Ages. It was a complete flip around in terms of saying we had a civilization, we had a society that was thriving, that was developing, and now we've kind of gone backwards, and we've become a lot more uncivilized and savage-like because of how the barbarians lived. Okay, here are some examples of what the barbarians would do, right, when they would take hold of a lot of prisoners. They would eventually just decapitate them, and it's very barbaric. So here is a map now of all the different types of barbarian kingdoms, right? So all of the Germanic barbarians, they have now settled, and they've established kingdoms, and it's just throughout. Let's talk about the church a little bit. Okay, so the church was the only surviving institution from the past, from the Roman Empire, and it really is to bring cultural unity throughout Western Europe, even though we know that politically, like, it kind of fell apart, right? All right, so there's going to be different types of roles in the church. One is the bishop. The bishop is the man who has regional authority, right, over the spiritual matters. And so there's going to be a bunch of bishops that still exist during the early Middle Ages. What's really important to know is that monasteries are going to be established, that this is these buildings, monasteries, are kind of like the only buildings that are really created. And the people that lived in the monasteries were going to be monks, or abbots and abbesses, which are nuns, basically men and women who wanted to get away from the violence and to live kind of isolated in quiet and peace, to focus on their spiritual lives and to get away from like the darkness, right? The thing about monasteries, why they're significant, is because they also was a place for learning, right? They had schools come through monasteries, right? They had libraries. That's where they kept a lot of the books, and they would actually continue to copy books by hand. Scribes would copy the manuscripts, kind of like that. Okay. So the Bishop of Rome, right, was eventually influential enough to be called the Pope. And that's kind of where it all began. And there's a difference between a Pope and a Patriarch. The Pope is the authority leader in the West, where the Patriarch is the spiritual authority leader in the East. The reason why Rome's such a crazy place is because, well, that's where Peter, right, one of Jesus' disciples, we talk about St. Peter, that's where he was martyred. That's where he was hung upside down on the cross. And so they thought that was a very spiritual place. That should be the center of everything, and that was the capital before too. So over time, because there's no emperor in Rome, the bishop in Rome began to take over the government more and to get involved in public affairs. And so the Bishop of Rome said that, what, we have authority over all Christians, and we, the church, is not ruled over by any secular power. So any secular ruler, we are above that. And he's establishing that. And so it's keeping the idea that the spiritual authority is independent, but also above the political power. And we're going to see that there's going to be a tug of war between the political authority and the spiritual authority, for the next millennium, starting now. Okay, so how does the Bishop of Rome actually claim to be the Pope? This is where it all begins. Okay, first one is going to be the Petrine supremacy. This was the first point, the first argument in saying that Saint Peter was told by Jesus that he was given the spiritual authority from God, and that those that followed followed Peter, right, would also have this authority because Peter's given the keys, and Peter would be the first pope technically, and he has the authority, right? So let me just read this. So you are Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church. This is Jesus speaking. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I shall entrust to you, Peter, the keys of the kingdom of heaven. So Peter has this authority in saying that because he's the first bishop, now the Pope also has this authority too, which is actually twisted. This is taken out of context, but that's how they introduced it, and they twisted it at the time. The second point The second argument is the donation of Constantine. This was a document that was stated that the bishop was given right to have authority over the political means, the political matters that happened in Rome. This is actually a forged document. It was revealed in the Renaissance, and we'll get there, but that was kind of the document that they held on to that said that we have the authority according to the Emperor Constantine from before. Okay, all right, so why is the church even like relevant in the early Middle Ages? Well, the church brought barbarians to be more civilized because missionaries that were sent out by the bishops in Rome, by the Pope in Rome, were able to meet the barbarians, translate the Bible into the language, and even though it wasn't written down, now they have kind of more written language, and they learned and they began to be converted. So by 700, we're going to see that the borders of Christianity, though it was very small before that, right, finally could reach back into Roman times to be spread throughout Europe. Okay. All right. Okay. So another religion that happens and established in the 1620s is Islam through the man Muhammad, who claims to be the prophet of God. It's going to be the fastest growing religion today and even back then in the world. And so the Arabs, they assimilated a lot of the different heritage that the Greeks had and the Romans had, and they contributed mathematics. And if you remember Arabic numbers and algebra, that comes from Islam. Okay, that comes from the Arabs. And so the Arabs adopt Islam as their religion, and you can see they're moving from outside of like what we call Saudi Arabia into more east, and also throughout North Africa, all the way going to Spain. And so they hit Spain in 711, but by 732 they actually are stopped in Tours, and that's where we're going to get to with Charles Martel to stop the Muslim invasion. But they actually would build up a great empire, and throughout this whole area today, except for Spain, they speak Arabic. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the Barbarian Kings. Barbarian Kings. The first one I'll talk about is the Salian Franks. Clovis the First is a barbarian commander. Okay, as a commander, he overthrew the last Roman commander in the West, and so he is kind of like the king that unites the West, and he establishes the Frankish Empire. So if you see the Franks or the Frankish Empire, that's going to be modern day France. Okay, here a picture of Clovis as king, but also he's getting baptized. So a few things. Okay, under him, he was able to defeat other Frankish kingdoms and stuff, and so he is the ruler of the Frankish kingdom. But also he himself converted to Christianity. Because he did so, he was able to convert everyone in the Frankish Empire to do the same. So this allows Christianity to grow, and he got a lot of support from the Catholic Church because he chose to be affiliated with Orthodox Christianity or Catholic Christianity, which just basically Catholic means universal, the universal church. But what this meant that a lot of other barbarians believed in Arian Christianity. So remember Arianism, the people that did not believe that Jesus was divine. Well, he chose to go with the Orthodox Church and saying that Jesus is divine, and so now Arians are seen as heretics. They're seen as people that are going against Catholicism. Okay. One thing to know before I pass over Clovis is that through the Kingdom of Franks, there's this thing called Salic law. Salic law that comes from the Salian Franks. Remember that. Write that down. We're going to come back to that eventually. Okay. All right. So time will pass, and no one's going to be under the Frankish kings to be, in the sense, as powerful as him, and so his descendants are really not really doing anything. They're more just inheriting the throne. Okay. Then comes the Carolingian dynasty from the Franks, same area. Okay, but now it's going to grow through this guy named Charles Martel. He is nicknamed the Hammer, as you can see him on his horse. But to hammer someone. Okay, so it's still from the Franks. Okay, it's still from the dynasty of the Franks. Okay, but the Carolingians are kind of like a faction from the Franks. One thing that to know for him is that he established the foundation of feudalism because he was kind of a warrior king. He rewarded his soldiers for their service, and he actually led them to battle to defeat the Muslims. And basically, he built up the Carolingian Empire, as you can see here, through just a lot of conquests and conquered a lot of other places. The most important thing about him is that he is the grandfather of King Charlemagne. So Charlemagne is really important because of how he, as a barbarian king, he is a descendant, and you can even see this is like 300 years after Clovis, and so he never knew Clovis, but at the same time, as a barbarian king, he's actually trying to change from the old uncivilized ways. Okay, so let me elaborate. He first established a capital in Aachen. This is in France, okay, on the border of France and Germany, or Aix-la-Chapelle. So having a actual capital, for one thing, actually shows, hey, you know what? Like a king is actually, establishing his own palace and kingdom, not an actual physical building, but actually a central location. Another thing is that he actually is going to be crowned by the Pope as Holy Roman Emperor in 800, and as the Pope and Charlemagne wanted, he says that if we try to bring back the glory of the Roman Empire, we can actually restore the spirituality, but also the grand empire as it once was. Okay, the fact is, the Pope crowning Charlemagne as the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, right, and saying that, hey, the religious authority is now choosing the political authority, and that's going to be something we talked about in the tug of war. Okay, what is most important about Charlemagne that really distinguishes him from other barbarian kings is that he wanted to bring a revival of education and learning. He actually didn't know how to read and write, okay, but leading into the High Middle Ages, which is actually a time where civilization is getting better, okay, he actually would want to educate the clergy, right? He would invite scholars to come from England, from Germany, from France, right? And he wanted Latin to be revived again in order to really develop culture, right? He actually wanted to set up embassies to build relationships with other foreign nations, right, in Constantinople, and he really wanted to recruit more intellectuals to be part of his kingdom. For one example, if you see on the very right, we have this script. Okay, this is called the Carolingian Manuscript, and we look right here. Oh, sorry. We look right here. Okay, the lowercase script that you can see here is called the Carolingian Minuscule, where we get our small letters of the modern alphabets. Okay, and so all these types of alphabet is now what we use today, thanks to Charlemagne. Okay, last point that's most important is that through Charlemagne we're going to see that there's a synthesis, right? A synthesis meaning that we're combining both Roman and German societies into one. Where the Franks are the only ones that could do it successfully, where you have Orthodox Christianity, you have Roman administration, and barbarian Frankish kingship, right? You have a military kingship. So, the king is supported by this warrior aristocracy, this upper class of warriors. At the same time, you have Christianity and Roman administration all synthesized together. So, one thing to know is that Charlemagne had these things called counts, and they're in charge of these counties. And a county is basically just a large area, and these counts are, they are administering justice. They are raising armies. So he actually has a system of government that is a little bit more than just localized. Okay, so as we should end, okay, a few things we need to understand is that through Charlemagne, from the early Middle Ages through Charlemagne, we see that Europe is actually developing a shape that is distinct from, let's say, the Greeks and the Byzantine Empire, that's distinct from the Arabs and the Muslim Empire, okay, and distinct from the Roman empires. It's a different type of look of Europe. Another thing is that through Charlemagne, as much as he has brought a lot of development, his heirs and descendants are going to fail to continue this on. But the main gist is, let's get an idea of what Europe looks like from the fall of the Roman Empire and up until now, with the Germanic barbarians influencing Europe to be what it looks like. right? And later we're actually going to see through Charlemagne and through the Carolingians um, that feudalism is going to be the main system and the look of what Europe is going to be like towards the end of the Middle Ages.